Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. Welcome to the fourth session of the US Philippines Indo-Pacific Conversation Series, organized in partnership with the Foreign Service Institute Philippines and is supported by the US Department of State through the US Embassy in Manila. I'm Jeffrey Ordaniel, non-resident adjunct fellow and director for maritime security at the Pacific Forum. On August 30, 1951, American and Filipino leaders signed the Mutual Defense Treaty. Since then, the bilateral security relationship has evolved considerably. It has faced a number of political changes, spanning 12 Filipino presidents and 14 American presidents. The alliance has confronted many security challenges, from the threat of communism during the Cold War and the dangers of violent extremism after 9/11, to the contemporary challenges of 21st century international relations, and arguably has withstood the test of time. This year, we celebrate the 70th anniversary of the alliance, often described in talking points of political leaders from both sides as, quote, an anchor for peace and stability in the region. In the past several years, however, there have been mounting questions on the relevance and effectiveness of the alliance in dealing with current security challenges, in particular, those in the South China Sea. There have been countless policy recommendations written by experts and academics on how to strengthen the deterrent value of the alliance and ensure that it is able to defend and advance a more rules-based regional order. To help us re-examine the value of a strong US-Philippine alliance, we are joined by distinguished speakers from the US and Philippine governments. And what an honor it is, and a personal privilege, to host live from Washington, His Excellency, Philippine Ambassador to the United States, Jose Manuel Babes Romualdez. And also joining live from Washington, despite the time difference, US Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for South and Southeast Asia, Lindsay Ford. Because of an urgent matter, Philippine Defense Secretary Delfin Lorenzana cannot join us live. However, he values this engagement and has recorded his keynote address just this morning in the Philippines, so we will still hear from him in this webinar. I want to read our speakers' really extensive and impressive bios, but if I do that, we are not gonna have time for their presentation and audience engagements. But just a little bit about our speakers, because it's really an honor to have them with us today. Joining Secretary Lorenzana is Ambassador Jose Manuel Babes Romualdez. Prior to his appointment, Ambassador Romualdez was a special envoy of the Philippine president to the United States. He has extensive experience as a media practitioner and business executive, and previously served as CEO of Stargate Media Corporation and publisher of People Asia magazine. Also president of the Manila Overseas Press Club and vice president of Rotary Club of Manila. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Ambassador. And also from Washington, D.C., we are so honored to be joined by the U.S. Assistant Secretary of Defense for South and Southeast Asia, Ms. Lindsay Ford. Before joining the Biden administration earlier this year, Ms. Ford was a David M. Rubenstein Fellow in Foreign Policy at the Brookings Institution, where her research focused on US security alliances and Asian regional architecture. Before Brookings, she was Director for Political Security Affairs at the Asia Society Policy Institute from 2015 to 2019. And before then, she served in a variety of senior roles within the Office of the Secretary of Defense, including as the Special Assistant to the Secretary of Defense for the US-ASEAN Defense Forum and Senior Advisor to the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Asian and Pacific Security Affairs. She has also served as an adjunct lecturer at George Washington University's Elliott School of Public Affairs. So really impressive lineup of speakers today. I know you're really looking forward to their remarks, but just a little disclaimer. All remarks, including those during the question and answer portion, are on the record, and we are live, not just through the Zoom platform, but also on Facebook. So just please be mindful of those. But before I turn over to our live speakers from Washington, D.C., let's first hear from the Philippines Secretary of National Defense, Delphine Lorenzana.
Philippine Ambassador to the U.S., Jose Manuel Romualdez, U.S. Defense Department Assistant Secretary Dr. Lindsey Ford, Dr. Jeffrey Ordaniel, participants, a pleasant day to all. Coming on the heels of my fruitful visit to Washington, D.C., this international forum is another timely and meaningful way of commemorating the 70th anniversary of the Mutual Defense Treaty and the 75th year of the alliance between the Philippines and the United States of America. This is a good opportunity for us to closely examine and learn from the successes and failures brought about by the U.S.-Philippine alliance in the last 7 decades. Rethinking the past with maturity and clarity will significantly contribute in charting a better and reimagined future for the alliance, the ultimate goal of which is for the Philippines and the US to forge stronger ties and for the benefit of both countries equally. Our relations are built on a foundation of strong historical and cultural ties. We have a common commitment to democracy and human rights, born out of our shared experience during the Second World War, where our soldiers fought shoulder to shoulder in defense of values that both Americans and Filipinos hold dear. However, it was truly the signing of the Mutual Defense Treaty in 1951 that solidified our relationship, setting up a strong foundation for a powerful, secure relationship between our countries and sealed our mutual commitment to defend each other against external armed attacks. Since then, this has been the overarching framework for the U.S.-Philippines defense relations as well as the backbone of the U.S.-Philippines alliance in general. Despite being perceived as a strongly written instrument, the MDT still received a number of criticisms, some of which include the ambiguities on the terminologies used, the extent of America's commitment to the alliance, particularly on the automaticity of response in case either party is attacked, the geographical coverage, and also both sides' shortcomings in terms of capability development. Even though the MDT was negotiated 70 years ago, its implementation has not been static. Succeeding agreements has made it relevant and has also made possible cooperation on maritime security, counterterrorism, humanitarian assistance and disaster response, cybersecurity, peacekeeping operations, and transnational crimes. However, recently, efforts to revisit the alliance picked up mainly due to the volatile security environments in the region. When former Secretary Mike Pompeo visited last February 2019, he assured the Philippines that the MDT would apply in an event of any armed attack on any Philippine forces, aircraft, or public vessels in the South China Sea. Subsequently, a policy statement on the maritime disputes was issued, affirming America's commitment to stand by the Philippines over its legitimate maritime claims in the area. Last July, this was echoed by the current Biden administration after Secretary of State Antony Blinken released a statement declaring, among others, that an armed attack on Philippine Armed Forces, public vessels, or aircraft in the South China Sea would invoke U.S. mutual defense commitments. Bilateral discussions have also been productive of late. 2 months ago, the visit of U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin to the Philippines led to President Duterte's decision to officially recall the termination letter of the Visiting Forces Agreement. In my official visit to the United States a few weeks ago, Secretary Austin and I agreed to undertake new initiatives, which includes developing a joint vision statement on shared priorities for the next phase of our alliance cooperation. We decided to convene the bilateral strategic dialogue to further discuss the alliance's shared priorities and encourage our respective armed forces to sustain cooperation under the Mutual Defense Board Security Engagement Board. We also plan to conclude a bilateral maritime framework that advances cooperation in the maritime domain and to resume enhanced defense cooperation agreement projects in approved locations in the Philippines. Rest assured that the Philippines has been doing its share of the bargain. We have revitalized the AFP modernization program and formulated a national security strategy that underscores external defense, complemented by a proposed minimum annual defense budget of 2% of our GDP. Simultaneously, we implement policies to strengthen our maritime security and upgrade our military capabilities. The delivery of several major defense equipment and weapon systems in recent years is a clear manifestation of this effort. Evidently, the AFP modernization program has gained momentum and is heading towards the realization of our goal to strengthen the AFP to effectively protect our sovereignty and sovereign rights and become a more effective ally to our neighbors. The Department of National Defense has also taken concrete steps not only to improve the alliance, but also deter conflict in the South China Sea and navigate through domestic political constraints. Our security cooperation with the US is vital in securing advanced weapon systems towards having a minimum deterrence capability against external threats. We also partner with other nations to promote security and enhance stability in the region. As the Philippines strives to cultivate more balanced relations with other countries in light of our constitutional imperative to uphold an independent foreign policy as well as our strategic interests, one thing stays constant: the US remains as our only treaty ally. Keeping our alliance robust is well within the interest not only of the Philippines and the United States, but also of the whole Indo-Pacific region. Thanks to the Pacific Forum for organizing this event with the support of the US State Department through the US Embassy here in Manila. Again, a pleasant day to all and stay safe.
So that was Secretary Delphine Lorenzana in a recorded keynote address. Without further ado, let me turn over to Ambassador Babes Romualdez, who is joining us live from Washington, D.C. Good evening to you, Mr. Ambassador. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Well, first of all, let me just greet everyone a good day joining us in today's webinar. And it is certainly an honor for me to be here with my friends, the other esteemed guests, Defense Secretary Delphine Lorenzana and Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense Lindsay Ford, to celebrate 70 years of our mutual defense treaty. When the Philippines and the United States jointly launched the anniversary logo, commemorating the 75 years of diplomatic relations between our two countries in February this year, our message was very clear. We are celebrating these milestones not just to take stock of what we have achieved together over the last 7 decades, but to also look at how we can make the relationship even more relevant and beneficial to our peoples, as well as responsive to the ever-evolving challenges today and in the future. The COVID-19 pandemic has surely brought to the fore the continued relevance of Philippines-US relationship, with both our countries helping each other to save lives through the supply of much-needed vaccines. The Philippines has thus far received 16 million doses through the COVAX facility, of which more than or close to 10 million were donated directly by the United States. Following the recent meeting between Foreign Affairs Secretary Teodoro Locsin Jr. and USAID Administrator Samantha Power, the Philippines will receive an additional 11.3 million in COVID-19 response financing, bringing the total US financial assistance to over close to 40 million US dollars. Without a doubt, the United States has been a reliable partner for us throughout this pandemic, with President Rodrigo Roa Duterte himself extending his gratitude to the Biden administration for giving us a hand during this very difficult and trying times. While we are still battling the pandemic, let us not forget that there is more work to be done to ensure that no virus will once again bring the world down to its knees. We continue to look to the United States to take the lead in rallying the international community towards a pandemic-free world, and we stand ready to do our part in partnership with the community of nations to achieve that objective. Time and again, this relationship has proven its relevance and importance amidst numerous challenges, from cooperation on disaster relief and recovery to countering terrorism and to economic development and fostering people-to-people exchanges. However, with the pandemic magnifying great power dynamics, particularly in our own backyard, all eyes have been on the old decade security alliance between the United States and how effective it will be maintaining peace and security in the region. In late July, President Duterte decided to terminate the abrogation of the Visiting Forces Agreement, cognizant of the rising tensions and geopolitical developments in the South China Sea, which many political observers and analysts refer to as the new theater for superpower rivalry. Both sides worked hard to get the VFA back on track, and I believe there is no better time to breathe new life into this agreement than during our milestone anniversaries. Meanwhile, as the Mutual Defense Treaty turned 70 in August, questions remain as to its possible applicability should conflict erupt in the South China Sea. To this, the United States, in no uncertain terms, reaffirmed, as it has done so several times recently, that an armed attack on Philippine armed forces, public vessels, or aircraft in the South China Sea would invoke U.S. mutual defense commitments under Article 4 of the 1951 U.S.-Philippines Mutual Defense Treaty. As we are all aware, and fortunately, the treaty has not been invoked given the absence of an external attack against both parties over the last 7 decades. In fact, both countries must be lauded for fulfilling their commitment under Article 1, which is to settle any international disputes in which they may be involved by peaceful means in such a manner that international peace and security and justice are not endangered, and to refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force in any manner inconsistent with the purposes of the United Nations. Indeed, Philippine foreign policy under President Duterte is aimed towards just that, the resolution of disputes through peaceful means and the prevention of conflict. Let me stress, however, that not having the condition for its applicability does not render the treaty irrelevant. Neither does the continued absence of conflict mean that the Philippines can bide its time in beefing up its own defense capabilities as provided for under Article 2. Undoubtedly, the world has markedly changed since 1951. Security threats have since evolved, and there are new realities that need to be considered for the treaty to be very effective in ensuring the security of both the Philippines and the United States. Indeed, the 2 in-person meetings between Defense Secretary Lorenzana and U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin last July and earlier this month have been very productive, touching on the need to make the MDT more attuned to the times, consistent with the treaty's Article 3 on consultations. In closing, since the Biden administration assumed office, the Philippines has been asked many times, what can the United States do for the Philippines? As with many others struggling to manage this pandemic and at the same time keep their economies afloat, we do need the help now more than ever. But one thing is imperative. We need to make the alliance and the relationship between our 2 countries truly effective and functional for the mutual security of our nations and our peoples. This starts with the recognition that at 75 and 70, our ties and alliance, respectively, will need a refresh, so to speak. As I have said, it is imperative for anything that old to evolve if it is to keep up with the times. In fact, the Philippines has proposed a multi-year plan that will ensure continuity and predictability in our efforts to modernize our military and defense capabilities. We do hope to sit down with our US counterparts to thresh out the details of this proposed program. Finally, to the United States, we say a stronger Philippines, both militarily and economically, can do a lot more for the United States than one that continues to be weak and unable to support itself. There is the word mutual in the MDT, and it is high time that the treaty lives up to its name, mutually capable of covering each other's back when and if the need arises. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Romualdez. Now let's hear from Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, Dr. Ford.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey. I just want to say thanks to you and Pacific Forum right off the top for convening this important event and for the invitation. I've had the pleasure of participating in a number of Pacific Forum events over the years. They are always top notch, and you do a really incredible job of bringing people together for important conversations about Asia, but I would say in particular Southeast Asia as well. So thank you for the great work that you do. It is an honor to be here tonight, to hear the remarks from Secretary Lorenzana and to be here with Ambassador Romualdez. I will say that I have felt incredibly privileged over the last several months to have such an excellent counterpart here at the Philippine Embassy in DC. I've gotten to know Ambassador Romualdez very well. And as you heard in the remarks that he just gave, he has been a real champion for our alliance relationship, and that is deeply appreciated. As everyone has noted, this is a very important year for the alliance. And I think we have a lot to be proud of, much of which has already been said in terms of the deep bilateral military cooperation that we've built over the past several decades, and the role that the alliance has played in sustaining peace and security in the Indo-Pacific region. But I very much agree with the comments by both Secretary Lorenzana and Ambassador Romualdez that this is also an important moment for us to look forward and to think about the next steps that we take together as allies. And I think in the conversations that we've had, both when Secretary Austin was in Manila in July, as well as when we were very privileged to host Secretary Lorenzana here earlier this month, these are indeed the things that we are focused on in terms of how we move our alliance into a new phase. As Ambassador Romualdez said, how we think about this as a mutual alliance, as it has always been envisioned between sovereign equal partners. And as we think about how to make this alliance more current and relevant to the security environment we face. So what I thought I would do tonight is say a little bit about what I see as some of the strategic context and the achievements, but then also to talk about where there are opportunities for the next phase of our cooperation. First, I think it's important to acknowledge the role that the U.S.-Philippines alliance plays, really as an anchor of our security network in Southeast Asia and in the broader Indo-Pacific region. When you look at Southeast Asia, I would say from geography to demography to the economy, it's critical to the future of what happens in the Indo-Pacific, but also in the world. A lot of times, this is well known for friends in Manila and elsewhere in Southeast Asia, maybe easy to forget sometimes when people are back here in DC, but Southeast Asia is enormous and incredibly consequential. The landmass of the 11 countries in Southeast Asia cover more territory than India. It's one of the most heavily, densely populated areas of the world, and 60% of the people in Southeast Asia are under 35. So I think when you talk about the future of the Indo-Pacific region, that there is no part of the Indo-Pacific that matters more for the future than Southeast Asia, and that is especially true in the Philippines as well. This is also a part of the world where the United States has deep economic roots. We have cumulative direct investment in Southeast Asia that exceeds $329 billion. It's greater US investments in Southeast Asia than China, Japan, and Korea combined. And it's also a critical region when it comes to global trade. We see, about $3.4 billion of trade that move through the region and through critical choke points for maritime trade. And I think looking forward, we also think countries like the Philippines will be a major driver of global trends. Southeast Asia, has the fastest growing economy in the world, it's a focus of international supply chains. And we also have to think about the fact that there are a lot of countries that have populations lying in low-lying coastal areas. So a huge priority for the Biden administration is climate change. And when we look at countries that we would like to partner with on climate change and who we think are critical to, how we build greater resilience and sustainability in the future, I think Southeast Asian countries are a key part of that equation. So for all these reasons, I think our alliance, it's important to remember, is anchored not just on the security relationship, but on much broader ties and interests that we have. And I would emphasize in particular that I think our alliance is anchored in the people-to-people ties. And this is something that, that Secretary Austin emphasized in particular when he was in Manila. In a lot of the stops that we made along the way, including, I would say, we had the pleasure of visiting, visiting the U.S. A VA clinic in Manila, and recognizing that we have about 30,000 U.S. veterans who live in the Philippines, and I think that really emphasizes how much our people are tied together, and that everything that we talk about on the security side has to be anchored in looking out for our people and for their future. So as we heard Secretary Romualdez talk about earlier, the basis of our alliance obviously is the 1951 Mutual Defense Treaty. And that provides the foundation for our defense relationship. And it enables critical military cooperation, along with newer agreements, the 1998 Visiting Forces Agreement, which we were very pleased to hear President Duterte make the decision to fully restore that agreement, which we think is critical to our alliance cooperation, and the 2014 Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement. All of these arrangements collectively have enabled tremendous and wide-ranging defense cooperation. The MDT is obviously the foundation, and I think the Biden administration, I would say Secretary Austin, have been abundantly clear about where we stand on the MDT, and that we absolutely believe and affirm in no uncertain terms that an armed attack on Philippine armed forces, public vessels, aircrafts in the Pacific, which includes the South China Sea, will trigger US obligations under the MDT, and that we fully intend to stand by those obligations. Well, while the MDT is the foundation for the alliance, I think there are a lot of other things that we do. The US and the Philippines conduct more than 300 bilateral defense engagements annually. That's a tremendous number. I think that's probably a number that's not known, that's not widely recognized or known, but that means that our armed forces are engaging with each other constantly and routinely, and that we are building habits of cooperation that we can apply to any number of challenges. The engagements that we do together range from major bilateral military training exercises, such as the Balikatan exercise, down to rotational deployments, subject matter expert exchanges, ship visits, and it really, I think, has built tremendous interoperability between our forces over the last several decades, so that we know in the event of a disaster or crisis how we can operate together. One of, I think, the most valuable elements of the cooperation that we've had has been working alongside the Philippines in counterinsurgency efforts in the southern Philippines, which we've been doing since early 2000. And the US provides a lot of advise and assist support with approximately 300 US personnel And importantly, this is the only named operation that we have in the Indo-Pacific region, is Operation Pacific Eagle Philippines. And so this is another example of, I think, practical value of our alliance and what it has meant for our mutual security on a regular basis. Now, Secretary Lorenzana and Ambassador Romualdez have acknowledged that the security environment is changing. I agree. It is certainly becoming more complex, and we need to think about how we posture the alliance for that reality. What we're seeing across the region, and certainly in the South China Sea, is a lot of actions that I think create new threats to countries' economic security, to their defense and to their sovereignty. We are absolutely committed to ensuring that we work alongside the Philippines to make sure that they have the necessary capabilities to defend, for the Philippines to defend its own interests. And for us to ensure that collectively the alliance has the ability to address some of the new threats and challenges we see in the security environment. This is one reason we have been deeply committed over the years to security cooperation and security assistance activities for our Philippine allies, and working alongside them to ensure that we're supporting force modernization efforts. And I think we very much welcome and appreciate all of the efforts that Secretary Lorenzana has been undertaking to really build up the AFP's capabilities for the future. Finally, I guess what I would say is that with the restoration of the VFA and the meetings that we've seen between Secretary Austin and Secretary Lorenzana this summer, I think we've really identified some concrete ways that we can move this alliance into the future. And Secretary Lorenzana mentioned some of these earlier. We're very excited to be working over the next several months on a joint vision statement together that will outline new priorities for the next phase of alliance cooperation. As well as working together on this bilateral maritime framework that will help us think about how we can cooperate more effectively in the maritime space. We're also going to be reconvening our bilateral strategic dialogue later this year, which will allow us, the Defense Department and the State Department, to look at an interagency approach to where we need to go next and new priorities that we can advance in the alliance. And then finally, I think we're very happy that we're going to be moving forward with the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, which we think will open up new opportunities, for our countries to posture ourselves to address a range of challenges, including natural disasters and other kinds of things that can affect, the Philippines and the region. So finally, I would just say, as we celebrate the 70th anniversary of the MBT this year, I think we are on a very positive path, to take ourselves into the next 70 years. And I think the future of this alliance is very bright. So Jeff, thanks so much again. Very much appreciate being here and look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Dr. Ford. Thank you again to both our distinguished speakers for really very illuminating remarks. So, having heard from both our speakers, in a couple of minutes, I will turn to our audience for their questions. The instructions for Q&A are flashed on your screen. To ask a question or to comment, please use the raise hand function located on the participants tab at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Wait to be called and unmuted by Pacific Forum staff before speaking, and please state your name and affiliation before commenting or asking questions. And please be very brief. Alternatively, you can also post your question on the Q&A tab. But if you are going to do that, please don't forget to identify yourself by stating your name and affiliation. So just to jumpstart our conversation, let me ask the first question. And this is addressed to both of you, Ambassador Romualdez and Dr. Ford. And perhaps we can start with the biggest challenge that is facing the alliance, right? The South China Sea. So the past several years have seen the strategic environment in the South China Sea worsen. And despite the dispute resolution mechanism enshrined in the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS, the 2016 Arbitral Tribunal's ruling on the Philippine case against China's 9-line claim, and the long-running efforts between China and ASEAN to establish a code of conduct in the South China Sea. it seems like reaching an amicable and rules-based settlement of disputes is farther away than ever. What do you think is the role of the US-Philippine alliance in advancing a rules-based maritime order in the South China Sea, in maritime Southeast Asia at large? Perhaps we could start with Ambassador Romualdez. If you could comment on the role of the alliance in advancing a rules-based order in maritime Southeast Asia.
Well, there is no doubt that this alliance is very important now more than ever, as I've always said that. And we've emphasized this on many occasions, that because precisely we had this decision by the arbitral court favoring the Philippines' claims and whatever it is that we have, and now the United States has indicated that they support this arbitral award given to the Philippines and perhaps to our other claimants, which is very clear now on what is what in the South China Sea. This alliance is very important, mainly because it sends a signal to any country that it is important that the freedom of the sea, or the freedom of navigation, is very clear, and that no one country can actually claim that they own this area or not. And of course, the Philippines believes in its own territorial integrity and as far as the economic zone is concerned. So this alliance, as I said, emphasizes that point. But more importantly, I think all nations, especially around the area and the claimants, follow a code of conduct that we are trying to push, but it has not really gone very far either. So it is important that we have this alliances that we have with all like-minded people who feel or believe in the rule of law.
Dr. Ford?
Thanks, Jeffrey. Ambassador Romualdez mentioned, rule of law, and I think in response to this question, I would say that, one of the most important things that the Philippines has done, frankly, is the decision to defend, to, I guess, use the rights that it has as a sovereign nation to protect its interests through the rule of law. And I think that the arbitral tribunal decision was really a historic one, and really commend the decision to move forward and demonstrate that under the rule of law, doesn't matter if you're, what size your country is, every country has the right equally to defend its interests, and that ideally under the rule of law, everyone is treated fairly. And I think that's what you saw in this case. And I think that what's important here in terms of the alliance is that we continue diplomatically to support the arbitral tribunal ruling and what it said. And then that operationally, we also continue to operate in a way that demonstrates the rights that are preserved through the arbitral tribunal and more broadly through the UN law on the sea. So I think that there is both a diplomatic component of what we can do through the alliance and an operational one as well.
All right. Thank you very much. And so now let's turn over to our audience. We have several raised hands. I'm going to call one American and one Filipino. So perhaps we can start with, so I'm going to take two questions at once. Let's take Hunter Marston and then Jay Tariela. So Hunter first.
Thanks, Jeff, and thank you to the speakers. I apologize if my internet is a little slow in Canberra today. I have sort of a two-part question for Deputy Assistant Secretary Ford. First, can you provide any insights into the contents of the joint vision statement? And secondly, looking ahead, I'm curious, how do both sides envision the implementation of EDCA going forward, specifically considering it's been one element of the alliance that's been very slow to be implemented in the last few years since its signing? Thank you.
And Jay? Go
Thank you,
ahead. Go
Jeffrey.
ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Ford and Ambassador Waldes. I have two questions for Dr. Ford. First, since many are relating Biden's order to withdraw from Afghanistan to be the end of U.S. liberal interventionism and commitment to defend partners, I would like to ask if this will also be the trajectory for the U.S. foreign policy in supporting its allies in the region. Second, and a separate question, while the White House of the Coast Guard organizations have become the primary options in patrolling the disputed waters in the South China Sea, I would like to ask if the U.S. Coast Guard and the Philippine Coast Guard will also be given significant roles should the Mutual Defense Treaty is evaluated, mainly so that both these institutions do not fall under the Defense Department. And then for Ambassador Waldes, I would like to know how the Washington views the utilization of white ships that sometimes appeared to be part of the state's gray zone tactics in asserting their claims in the South China Sea. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, Jay and Hunter. So over to our speakers. Perhaps we can start with. All right. So who wants to answer first?
I'm happy to go ahead.
All right. Go ahead.
So on the questions, thanks very much. Hunter, sorry I can't actually see you, but I'm sure you're doing well in Canberra. The joint vision statement. Look, I think that there are a number of things that this can encompass. The reality is I can't tell you what's in it because you know, we're working on it. We're working on it now. But I would say stay tuned, and we'll have a lot more to say about this over the next several months. But again, I think the goal of doing this together is that we can pinpoint new priorities and areas of cooperation for the alliance that we think are particularly important given the current security environment. On EDCA, I think we're really pleased that we have some immediate opportunities to resume construction at some of the EDCA projects. And you know, again, I think the decision to fully restore the VFA has made that possible, which is really positive. And we're going to be looking to do that in a few sites over the coming months. On the question about Afghanistan and what that means, you know, I think that the analogy is actually wrong. I don't think that when we look at what's happening in Afghanistan, that is actually says anything about U.S. alliances. I think that President Biden made a decision about you know, the situation that we faced in Afghanistan, and the fact that he thought that the United States had completed what it had gone there to do. And it was therefore time to leave. And look, the reality is, you know, that you know, withdrawing from a situation like that oftentimes is challenging. But I don't think that that is an apt analogy for the commitments that the United States has through its treaty alliances. I think that's which are a fundamentally different kind of relationship. And I would say that instead of using Afghanistan, I think that if you look at 70 years of history in the Indo-Pacific region, the United States has been there very consistently, and that we remain there, and that we've been incredibly clear over and over that the United States has no intention of leaving the Indo-Pacific, and if anything, is only looking to enhance our engagement there.
All right. Thanks, Dr. Ford. Ambassador Romualdez.
Well, on the question of the white ships, I assume that they're referring to some of the ships that are now parked around the area where I think it's a Justin Reef or something. Well, we have our Department of Foreign Affairs Secretary Locsin has obviously used her diplomatic means to be able to on all of the ships that are there, but quite a number have left. I know that there are still a couple of more there. while we here in Washington, D.C., we have, of course, discussed this on numerous occasions with our friends at the State Department and also at the White House. And it was very clear that we have to try to resolve these issues as quietly as we can, diplomatically, and try to find ways and means to be able to clearly state that if they are operating unlawfully, that they have to leave the place. But again, we have to take the lead. The Philippines will have to take the lead on this one, and we have to find ways and means to be able to resolve these issues. As you know, this is very sensitive. We need to be able to balance our relationship between the United States and, of course, needless to say, China.
All right, thank you very much. On the Afghanistan question, I wonder if I could press the both of you on this. So first to Dr. Ford, I wonder, many in the region expect that the withdrawal of the United States from Afghanistan is good news for the region, for the Indo-Pacific. Some pundits and experts here expect that the withdrawal will result in freeing up resources for the United States to finally focus its attention on the Indo-Pacific region. Is that a fair expectation? And also to Ambassador Romualdez, I'm sure you've been watching the news there in Washington also about the withdrawal from Afghanistan. In terms of the impact of that to the security environment in the Philippines, especially in Mindanao, is there any, do you foresee any implication, or you think that the alliance is enough to actually deter whatever it is that that may threaten Philippine security in the South?
Well, there is no doubt that,
No, babe,
there
go
is no
ahead.
doubt. Yeah, okay. Thank you, Lindsay. No, there is no doubt that what happened in Afghanistan, the withdrawal, or the United States withdrawing completely from their forces in Afghanistan, and there is a major concern, obviously, for the terrorist activities, especially on the number of those members of the ISIS group that have been released as part of the condition by the Taliban. And obviously, we are concerned that this could spill over to Mindanao, which is still a continuing problem for us in terms of potential terrorist activities. There are still pockets there after the Marawi siege, and we're looking at that very seriously. And of course, we're working with our friends here in the United States in Washington, D.C., to make sure that we share any intelligence that we have as far as the movements are concerned regarding that. But that's as far as I know at this point.
Dr. Ford?
Great, thank you. I would say we are, as I said, we are incredibly focused on increasing and enhancing our engagement in the Indo-Pacific region. I'm very cognizant that friends in the Indo-Pacific may say, well, we've heard that before, and we would like to see the resources to follow. I am familiar with that argument. I would tell you that I think that is something that we are very deeply focused on. And I do think that, at least from the Department of Defense perspective, that we do have an ability to focus much more intently on what we're trying to do in the Indo-Pacific, and ensuring that from a resource perspective, as well as just how we, where we spend our time and attention, that our actions really follow the rhetoric. And I think if you look over the last several months, even just from the perspective of where are our senior leaders spending their time, I think that we are walking the walk on that. You know, I have been in this job for 7 months. I did not expect that in the first 7 months of a pandemic that I would twice be out to Asia, but that is the case. You know, Vice President Harris was also just out in Southeast Asia. I think we are really we are putting a lot of emphasis behind the fact that we want our Indo-Pacific allies and partners to see how focused we are, and that we are bringing concrete deliverables to really back up what we say about engaging in the Indo-Pacific.
Right. So let me take in 2 questions again. We have a raised hand from Jim Kelly, a former Assistant Secretary of State for East Asia and Pacific Affairs, and then De La Salle University professor Renato Cruz de Castro. So first, Secretary Kelly.
Now, am I audible?
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you very much. And my question is really in a larger sense to Ambassador Romualdez, in the sense as a member of ASEAN and the concerns that so many of us have for the situation in Myanmar. And any comments that the ambassador might want to make about the ASEAN effort to perhaps obtain some resolution, and whether the Philippines has some views on this that might be helpful. Thank you very much.
Well, yes, we definitely have expressed, our Secretary of Foreign Affairs, Secretary Locsin, has expressed very strongly that we would like to see a democratic government to be quickly installed in Myanmar. It was very clear to us from the very beginning that that was where we wanted this thing to happen. Now, my colleagues here, of course, we've discussed this on numerous occasions, and we have appointed the ASEAN has appointed an ambassador to go to Myanmar, but he was unsuccessful. But we're trying other means to be able to diplomatically start our work in trying to get Myanmar to at least sit down with other members. We would like to see Myanmar obviously become a continuing member of the ASEAN, but this problem, of course, is not an easy one to resolve very easily. And so our foreign ministers have indicated that they will have another meeting specifically just to discuss Myanmar at some point sometime within the next couple of weeks.
Right, thank you, sir. Professor Renato Cruz de Castro. Go ahead, please.
Okay. Good evening, Ambassador and Assistant Secretary Listy Ford. Now, my question has to do with the speech delivered by Secretary Lorenzana a couple of weeks ago in Washington, D.C., where, of course, he raised Philippine expectations from the United States in terms of clear security guarantee on the basis of the MDT, assistance to the Armed Forces of the Philippines Modernization Program, and, of course, in terms of broadening the MDT to address China's gray zone operation. What is obviously absent from his speech was the Philippines' commitment to the Mutual Defense Treaty. As we all know, an alliance is a two-way street. There's no mention of what should the Philippines offered in return. And of course, this is not helped by statements by high officials of the current administration that if push comes to shove with the South China Sea, the Philippines will be neutral. And of course, the mantra of independent foreign policy that the Philippines has, is friends to all, enemies to none. That will not be the case if you have an alliance, because the enemy of your ally is automatically your enemy too. So again, I'm addressing the question to both speakers. How should the Philippines basically fulfill its obligation under the Mutual Defense Treaty? It's not, again, an alliance is not a one-way street. And the last question regarding EDCA, when EDCA was, of course, laid down on the table in 2016, the Philippines promised 5 air bases to be sites of agreed locations. And from what I heard, 2 of those bases had been closed for EDCA, specifically those bases that are close to the South China Sea, specifically Mactan and the one in Palawan. I don't know what's the status of those agreed locations. There's supposed to be 5 agreed locations. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to raise those questions.
Thank you, Professor De Castro. Before I turn to our speakers, let me just go over some of the questions on the Q&A tab as well. So perhaps that would give you time to think over all of these questions and maybe choose those that are you think appropriate. So we have a question from Jika Mangajas, one of our young leaders and a PhD candidate at SAIS. And this is addressed to Ambassador Romualdez. You mentioned that the pandemic has given new eyes on the strategic competition in the region. The Australia, UK, US deal, or the AUKUS deal, is the latest development we've seen. What position does the Philippines take on the Australia, UK, US deal? How do you feel about the concerns that have been raised by some ASEAN neighbors? I think she's referring to Indonesian concern and Malaysian concern about the deal contributing to an arms race in the region. So that's for you, Secretary. That's for you, Ambassador Romualdez. And we also have here a question. I think this is also related to Professor Renato Cruz de Castro's question. We have a question here from Fumio Ota. Due to the US Pacific Deterrence Initiative, the US intends to deploy missiles along the first island chain. Will the Philippines accept US missiles into its soil? So this is from a retired Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force Vice Admiral Fumio Ota. So perhaps we can turn back to our speakers. Ambassador Romualdez.
Well, thank you. Well, let me just, well, first of all, let me greet my friend, Professor Rene. Very nice to hear from you. Well, let me just be very clear. The DMDT is, well, like I said, it's a mutual defense treaty. But we have always said that a mutually defensible situation is really mutual, okay? We keep going back to that. If both have the same kind of more or less firepower, whatever you want to say is what it is. For many years, whether it is our fault or not, our armed forces has been quite, I would say, not up to par. And we need to modernize it. This has been the plan since the time of President Ramos and up to now. For the first time, the budget of the Philippine Armed Forces has increased almost tenfold. We're spending something like we've spent so far, somewhere between 10 to 15 billion as they planned out US dollars in terms of buying more equipment. We're not asking for hand-me-downs, as President Duterte has said. So this is one of the programs that we have, is to modernize our armed forces to precisely be able to come up to par with our defense treaty like the United States. This is what we have been saying from day one, ever since President Duterte became president, that it's important to have this type of situation. And we have to remember what happened in 2012, when the Philippines was actually in Scarborough Shoal, and that was a major issue that has been discussed thoroughly, that the United States then said repeatedly that they do not get involved in territorial disputes, but they asked us to leave Scarborough Shoal because we were there together and the Chinese were also there. We withdrew, but the Chinese did not. And we could not do anything about it because we did not have the wherewithal. And at that time, the policy of the United States was that not to get involved in any of these disputes. So having said that, again, it is very clear now more than ever, and I've said this, and I'm sure our colleagues here in Washington, D.C. have indicated that we now have to really modernize, or we have to upgrade the MDT, update it, make it more meaningful in the relationship, especially with the challenges that we have with the South China Sea. The Duterte administration has about 9 months left, but we continue to still go on with our plan to modernize the equipment. And that is why in the meeting that we have had with Secretary Austin, and also even with the State Department and the White House, together with Secretary Locsin, we have said that we have to come out with a 10-year program to be able to put some meaning and teeth into our mutual defense treaty and our alliance and our relationship. Not to say that we, of course, as Dr. Ford said, that we have to continue to work closely also diplomatically in resolving many of the issues surrounding the South China Sea. And now, as far as the question on the Australia, UK, US tripartite agreement, I think Secretary Locsin has made it very clear that we are very happy with that, because it is a way to deter any activity that that will hopefully will never happen, but it is a deterrent. And I think many of the other nations are feeling the same way. I know that there's been some concern expressed by some of our ASEAN colleague friends, and rightly so. There is always that question of what is bringing up the tension again, or bringing it up to a level. But we all know that the situation is really something that has to go, as again, quoting from what our friend Lindsay Ford said, we have to balance it between diplomatic solutions, and operationally we have to put teeth into it. And that's what it is. We're doing as well as we could on the diplomatic front, but we have to operationally also be ready for any eventuality, and hopefully it will never happen. That, I think, is the view of that we all have, and I'm sure when and if the ASEAN ministers will have a meeting, on top of the discussion will this new tripartite agreement that was recently announced by both President Biden, the Prime Minister of Australia, and the UK.
Thank you, Ambassador Romualdez. Dr. Ford?
Thanks, thanks, Jeffrey. On the question about EDCA, I would just say that I think we are working through various projects now, but we're looking at projects at all 5 sites, and so I think that that's very positive. I would just add, I guess, on on the question about Myanmar, that I would echo that I think it's incredibly important that the United States, the Philippines, all countries in the region really emphasize the importance of implementation of the 5-point consensus that ASEAN negotiated, on seeing the special envoy be able to do his work, and on moving Myanmar back toward democracy. Because I think this is an issue that matters not just for Myanmar, but really for the future of the region as well, and it's an incredibly important one.
Thank you very much. So let's go over some of the raised hands. Willard Cheng from ABS-CBN News. Go ahead, sir. And seems like he's gone. David Day.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Good evening, Ambassador Romualdez and Dr. Ford. I think one of the things that it's important for all of us to focus on, if we look at a long-term upgrade of the MDT, is is to understand that it was formulated in 1951, and in more recent years, we've seen a warfare shift from the People's Republic of China into areas of unconventional warfare, gray zone tactics, and the MDT looks to me like it is basically focused on kinetic engagement, that is, attacks on the armed forces of the Philippines. And in this area of reality that we're operating in now, the Republic of the Philippines and the United States are both faced with various kinds of political warfare, unconventional warfare, malign influence, cyber attacks, and so forth coming in from China. And I'd like your comments as to whether you think this is an area that the future of the MDT needs to look at. And I'm the chairman of the Global Risk Mitigation Foundation based in Honolulu.
Thank you, David. Back to our speakers. Whoever wants to address that first.
Okay. Well, well, first of all, again, it's good to hear from you, David. And well, as you and I have discussed in the past during a visit here in Washington, D.C., we believe that, as we've said, that the MDT has to really cover as much ground as we can in terms of the alliance. And yes, I agree with you that a cyber attack on any one of our countries is also very critical at this point. We know that what it can do, and we've seen that happen here in the United States, a cyber attack on some of your very important industries, like the oil industry, for instance. So we really need to be cognizant of all of these new types of so-called warfare, where we need to update our alliance. So we need to work together in trying to counter many of these types of activities that will hamper our security down the road. This is no doubt some of the things that we would like to see when we do have this, especially when we have this bilateral strategic dialogue that we plan to have, our 9th one, and we could possibly have that as one of the issues that we should discuss on how we can strengthen that alliance.
Dr. Ford?
Thank you. Yeah, I would just echo Ambassador Romualdez's remarks and say, look, I think we're all very cognizant of the degree to which the security environment has changed and become more complex. And that oftentimes that means that there are indeed things like gray zone threats, things that are difficult to attribute, that may not be kinetic in the sense that we would normally think about it, but that are real threats that as allies we have to figure out how to address together. And that's why I think a lot of the things that we talked about earlier, working through a bilateral maritime framework, thinking about a joint vision statement, are indeed very focused on how we see the security environment evolving and what we as allies need to be able to do about it.
Jeffrey, can I make a comment following these two speakers?
Yes, sir. Go ahead, please.
I think
Just be very brief.
Ambassador Romualdez and Dr. Ford, these are areas that perhaps the Philippines can develop the expertise by way of counterterrorism and pushback in terms of the broad field of political warfare, that an expertise that would be equal to or greater than that possessed by the United States, and in areas in which the Philippines can then provide an important contribution on the mutual side of the defense treaty, playing an important role as a partner, an additional piece of the puzzle, if you will. And I'll leave my comments there, and thank you both.
Thank you, David. So we're down to our last few minutes. So what I'm gonna do is just to sort of read some of the outstanding questions that have not been answered yet, and let our speakers answer some or all of them. So we have several questions here that are, I think, very relevant. So Drake Long asks, what are the biggest obstacles still remaining for EDCA sites to become operational? We also have a question here on, obviously, a lot of discussions in U.S.-Philippines Mutual Defense Treaty center on the South China Sea, but the South China Sea is not the be-all and end-all of the security relationship. So I wonder if there are also discussions on, and some of the speakers, some of the questions here have alluded to also, is there any discussion on some of the other aspects of bilateral and regional security concerns, for example, counterterrorism, cybersecurity, and there is a question here on economic security, insulating the Philippines from potential economic coercion from third parties. So I wonder if you could address some of those questions. Perhaps we can start this time with Dr. Ford.
Sure. Thank you. Look, yeah, the alliance is far broader than just talking about maritime security or the South China Sea. I don't think it was ever intended to be a relationship that focuses just on one issue. And as I said earlier, I think we've had very positive cooperation on a number of other issues, including counterterrorism. Some other things I would say. I think the ability of the alliance, to allow us to respond collectively to, natural disasters and climate-related disasters is an incredibly important thing when you look at some of the challenges that Southeast Asia faces on that front. So I think that's a positive area for cooperation. I think there are a number of other areas that we could continue to work on as well. Looking at things like we were talking about earlier, threats that occur in cyberspace, how to handle those. I think really the alliance can be relevant across the region in a number of ways. That certainly, while the South China Sea is incredibly important, this is an alliance that is very wide-ranging.
Ambassador Romualdez.
Okay, well, first of all, on the EDCA sites, I know that there's been some obstacles, and most of these are some legal problems that we have with some of the areas that need to be resolved. But we're working very closely with the United States on some of these issues. But we are very eager to get that thing going again. And there are 5 identified sites that we like to have this to start moving fairly quickly, as I said. But that's very important for us, and I see that as part of what we see on the long-term plan that we have, that this continue and speed it up so that it'll be up to par with the current situation that we're in right now. Now, on cybersecurity, and I agree with Secretary Ford on what you said, that we're working on trying to find a way to be able to work together as far as cybersecurity. And now, on economic security, that is the theme that I have started here, as I'm now the current chairman of the ACW, which is the ASEAN committee here in Washington, D.C. for the next 4 months. And we are concentrating on economic recovery and economic prosperity for the ASEAN region. And so we've had, in fact, we've started already. We started with an event with the American Chamber. Members of many of their members are now operating in the Asian region, and many of them are looking at starting to diversify from China to the other Asian countries. And so we're working with organizations like the American Chamber, the U.S. ASEAN Business Council, and the other organizations here like the Potomac Exchange and many others that are involved in business activities in the Philippines that would help definitely the economic recovery of the Asian region and, of course, the Philippines. And we're hoping that this will be progressively move quicker as this pandemic starts to sort of like, hopefully will start to slow down, especially early next year. We're hoping to have many business activities along those lines. And mind you, we're also very grateful that the United States, the USTR, is opening an office in the embassy in Manila. Again, as far as trade is concerned between the Philippines and the United States. And also, we're working with the Development Finance Corporation into looking at joint venture projects to address some of these things that we would like to see, like alternative energy to help in the climate change, and many other things that we're hoping will come into fruition as soon as things get better in terms of the pandemic. So we're very optimistic about the future of the Asian region. It is the place where things are going to start moving, hopefully by next year.
All right. Thank you very much to both our speakers and to Secretary Lorenzana. This has been a really productive session. The Philippines is America's oldest treaty ally in Asia. It remains very consequential, and it continues to hold tremendous potential in maintaining a favorable balance of power in the region and in advancing a more rules-based regional order. This is not a perfect alliance. Obviously, improvements are needed to move the alliance forward into the future. And we have heard from our distinguished speakers that they have that dialogues are ongoing precisely on improving the alliance and moving the security relations into the future. And so that ends our public session. Thank you to our distinguished guests, Ambassador Romualdez, Dr. Ford, Secretary Lorenzana in Manila. Thank you for the time in engaging with us today. And also to our 200 attendees from both sides of the Pacific. This has been a really, really good discussion. So thank you for joining us. We will now transition to an off-the-record session with our Filipino and American young leaders.